the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Stand up again and put your hand over your heart. I pledge allegiance to the flag, come on, of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We have argued so bitterly over the phrase "under God" that we have forgotten that we are pledging our allegiance to the republic. And that is something we can never forget. Pledge of Allegiance was basically the beginning of every school day in every public school in the country, and was until, let's say, the early 1960s. It was spoken of in over 90% of all the public schools in the nation. 10 years later, in the early 80s, it was completely and utterly gone. And no public schools ever did the pledge or study civics again. Why would we stop teaching our children an ability to learn and have an early vision of how to run the country before it's their turn to run the country? Why would we not teach them any different methods of communication, such as civility or civic authority and context and debate? Those things that teach you how to hone the intellect of the mind. Why would we stop teaching our children how to think with some brilliance? Why would we stop teaching our children who we are obligated to teach according to the Constitution of the United States? We have an obligation to teach the children who will run this country in the future. We have an obligation to teach them our present, and we learn of our present from our past. We don't teach history. We don't teach anything at all during the public school years. We are now too busy answering the question, how much public money is spent on public schools, rather than everyone knowing the answer to that question, which is whatever it takes. We are so cost conscious and cost obsessed that we are only capable of cutting and cutting and cutting, so that we leave our children with minds that have no art and have no sense of ownership of the act of creativity. They can add, they can subtract, some of them can divide, and none of them have attained clarity of thought and clarity of expression. Why would we stop teaching these things? We used to teach them, and now we don't. What's changed? There was a man named David Sarnoff, and David Sarnoff was an immigrant who became one of the nation's most admired and respected citizens. He owned the NBC network. He owned the NBC radio network, and he built RCA Victor television sets. He created the NBC television network so that if you bought an RCA Victor television set, you would have something to watch called NBC. David Sarnoff was considered a great hero and a man of great ethics. What would have happened had we discovered, after we had bought our first or second RCA Victor TV, that when we turned it off at night, it didn't go off? That, contrary to what he had said, it didn't go off, and it kept gathering information about anything it heard coming from our living room, kitchen, and bedroom, and sold that information to advertisers. What would we think of David Sarnoff then? We would hang him up by his thumbs, that's what we would do. We would string him up and send him up the river for long prison terms. That's what we would have done in early 1952. And you all know. Now we have Mark Zuckerberg. And Mark Zuckerberg, I don't think he sweats when he stands or sits before the Congress, having sworn an oath to tell the truth, that he's going to be punished in any way for being dragged, kicking, and screaming into admitting that he, in fact, did the very thing that David Sarnoff is accused of. In my little picture, Mark Zuckerberg sold us Facebook, and then he had to have dragged out of him the fact that it couldn't turn off and that it sold the information that it got to advertisers. He's not worried about getting punished, and quite frankly, we're not worried about him getting punished. What's changed? You know the answer to that already. We have. We have changed. And at a very, very, very high cost. Far beyond all the money that may be represented in this room. The United States was, until 75 years ago, the most respected and admired country on the face of this earth. Because we were the only nation in all of man's history to publicly identify with the common man. And we said that with only the slightest of basic education, reading, writing, sums, and studying the values of our Constitution and our Bill of Rights, the common people could run this country. That was considered a revolutionary statement because until then, and from the very beginning of human civilization, and I mean whether you say it's 6 or 10 or 12 or 14,000 years ago, man had ruled other men, quite simply, by having the money to buy the army that could hold you as victims of domestic terror in enforced ignorance and physical pain, and with the culpability of every religion. And then we came along and said to monarchy and aristocracy, "You're fired." the people, the ancient regimes of Europe, been able to hire the British Navy as a taxi shuttle service, they would have hopped on that British Navy and come over to us and strangled all of us in our beds. But they didn't, because they couldn't. The British Navy had been given another task, and that task was find another penal colony. All we were to Europe was a penal colony where they dumped their prostitutes and their second sons. That's all we were. So we had a war, and we became independent of Europe. And then we did something that has earned and kept the word revolutionary right next to our name. A revolutionary doctrine. That education was not something to be punished for, education was a reward. Until us, and I'm not being general when I say that, until us, until 1776, mankind treated education or the request to learn as a punishment, and the punishment was applied by chopping noses, chopping fingers, chopping feet, or killing. No one was allowed to rise above the station that he was born into until us. And we said, you can rise as far as your native talents can take you. And so we started the largest voluntary mass movement of people in the history of the human race. So, you should never forget certain things. One of them is, we did that before anyone had done that. And people came here because they could get from us what they had wanted from anyone for all of civilization's history. We were the good guys, and we were against the bad guys. And we don't tell this story at all to our children. We made a deal, and the deal was, we get this government, and we get these rights, and we get these responsibilities, liberties. We get them, and we teach them to our young so that it can continue. And we stopped our part of the deal. Why? Unfortunately, the people who are in this room are either going to have to answer that question while they're alive, or answer to their children, who will certainly be alive as the world attacks them, and they will have no talent to defend themselves, no ability to ward off the villainy. They will not understand why we have abandoned them, why we have not taught them, and why we have not understood that we, by being so penny-ante with how we spend our money, have forgotten. If we're not spending most of our money for the protection of our progeny, if we're not spending our money for the reasons of making the future an American future, then regardless of how much you have at this moment, you will lose. And this country will not survive until the end of this century. And that is a promise. I have what is called Cassandra's curse. How many people here know what Cassandra's curse is? Anybody? Cassandra was a Trojan princess who was cursed by Apollo. She would know the future in detail, and no one would believe her. And I'm telling you, I've got Cassandra's curse in a big wallet. And I'm saying to you that if you don't take action, and if you don't redefine your abilities, and if you don't stop being so disgracefully greedy and disgracefully corrupt, you will lose the last best hope for mankind. You will lose America. America offers you everything, and you kick it into the ocean as if it was a piece of sand. And I'm telling you, you will personally regret every single time you turn away from your responsibility as parents, as citizens, as the sovereign power in this country. Every time. And you will become, it will be harder and harder and harder for you to deny all the things being said about the NRA and global warming and anything else. You're in a tough position because you've got no ethics that you can sit on and get strength from, because we stopped teaching them to you. You've got to find them again, and you've got to start teaching them to yourselves and to your kids. And if you don't think that I'm speaking out of turn, if you think in any way that I'm exaggerating the situation, I feel only sorrow and sadness for what you are going to learn about yourselves in the next 20 years.